Hello everyone and welcome. Thank you for joining me in the video today. I'm really excited today because I just took delivery of this box, which contains a really cool and unusual instrument. In today's video, I'm going to be unboxing this instrument, showing it off to you guys, and fixing it up and seeing how it sounds. So without further ado, let's get started. This is a Hammerschmidt German system bass clarinet. Now there are so many cool and unusual things about this instrument, I don't even know where to begin. So compared to a typical French bass clarinet, I think the most obvious difference would be just how skinny it is. So your typical French bass clarinet has a bore around 23.3 to 23.6 millimeters in diameter. So this bass clarinet only has a bore of 20.5 millimeters, which is actually a little bit bigger than your typical German system instrument, but still much skinnier than your average French bass clarinet. So you can see it has a very thin profile. And one of the other very distinctive features of this instrument, even compared to other German system instruments, is the body material. This is actually a bass clarinet that's made of maple. In fact, if you look at the bell, you can actually see the same tiger striping that you tend to see on a lot of high-end bassoons. Now this is really unusual for a bass clarinet, and it's always something I've been curious about because maple is actually a really good wood to build instruments out of. It's very lightweight, it's very plentiful, and you can get it in very large sizes. So I've always wanted to experiment with having a low clarinet made out of maple, and now I finally have this one. And in addition to that, obviously the biggest difference between this and a typical bass clarinet would be the keywork. So this is German system keywork. So in the lower register, B flat is 1 and 3. In the upper register, that would be your F. In the lower register, again, F would be middle finger, just like a saxophone, which would be C in the upper register. So a very cool and unusual instrument to see here in the United States. I'm very excited to dig deeper into this instrument, get it playing, and see how it sounds. Okay, so the first thing I like to do whenever I get an instrument is evaluate it. So what I like to do is I like to go over every key and see what moves and what is stuck. So in this case, most of the keys on this instrument move fairly freely. However, there are two stuck keys that I did notice, and that's the A key and this key, which is connected to the left-hand ring system. So those are going to need to be addressed. I also like to look at the pads and cords and just evaluate the overall condition of them. So in this case, the pads on this instrument look pretty old. So I probably am going to need to overhaul this instrument at some point, but that is a mission for another time. Right now, I just want to get this instrument playing and see how it sounds. So it looks like most of these pads, while old, are at least intact, so they should seal for the moment. So we're going to address these two stuck keys. A few other things that I also like to do to any clarinet that I receive, I make sure that the socket rings are tight, because if those aren't tight, it can cause the instrument to crack. And I do like to oil and clean the bore quickly, just to make sure that I protect the wood as much as possible if I'm going to be testing it out. Eventually, when I do a full overhaul, it is going to get an oil bath. But for right now, I'm just going to give a quick oil and cleaning to the bore. Okay, so I've given the bore a light coating of oil, which should help protect the wood when I do go to test this out. Now, again, eventually I'm going to fully clean the wood and it's going to get a full oil soak, but that is something that I will do further down the line. So while that oil is drying, I'm going to now address these stuck keys. Okay, so while I'm waiting for the penetrating oil to work its magic, let's talk about the mouthpieces. So this instrument actually came with its own custom mouthpieces. This is actually a Zinner mouthpiece. It's a Zinner German bass clarinet mouthpiece. They're very rare, so it's really cool that it came with one. And the facing actually looks pretty good. Now normally, I just use my favorite German bass clarinet mouthpiece, but it doesn't fit. That's because the standard for German bass clarinets has changed over the years. So I'll have to use the mouthpiece that came with the instrument, and it's a little gross inside. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to soak it in a mixture of water and vinegar to get some of that grime out and make it nice and clean. And of course, right when I decided to record that, this guy decided that he wanted to play with the box. So please excuse any background noise. Now, in addition to all the work you just saw me do, there was quite a bit of work I had to do off camera to get this instrument playing. That being said, I am quite happy with how it came out. Granted, it does have some cosmetic wear. There's some wear in the finish, some dents, stings, scratches, other things you'd expect to see on a used bass clarinet. But mechanically, it's in pretty good condition. And unfortunately, the pads were good enough that I was able to get it playing, which is very good news. Now, I'd like to take a little bit of time to talk about what I know about this instrument. So as far as I can tell, it dates from the first half of the 20th century, most likely from around 1920 or 1930. And the reason I can tell that is because of the general design of the instrument. So notably, some differences you would see on this instrument versus a modern German system bass clarinet. So it's actually got two open tone holes for the left hand. So any modern bass clarinet is going to have plateau keys over those, just so it's not as much of a stretch. And this bass clarinet's a little bit of a stretch, but it's manageable. It's not too bad. Some other differences, so it has an automatic register vent system. However, it only has one register vent instead of the normal two that you would tend to see on more modern instruments. Going down the instrument, it doesn't have a left-hand A flat, E flat, although it really wouldn't be too hard to add one, so I may do that at some point. And the range is to low D. Now, the extension is actually pretty interesting. So you can see the low E flat key right here. It's just a very simple pivot key with a pad cup on the back of the instrument, very simple. And then the low D key is actually interesting because it has a key on the bell, which is not something you see a lot on German system instruments. Very common on French bass clarinets, but on this instrument, it's very uncommon to see this because the low D actually comes out of the bell, which is again something you don't really see on modern German bass clarinets. Usually there's some kind of vent hole on either the bow of the bell or even on the body, but you don't really see that in this instrument. So it gives the low D a very distinct tone compared to other German bass clarinets. Another interesting feature of this bass clarinet, it actually has pearls on some of the touch pieces. Something, of course, you see on saxophones, but not really something you see a lot in bass clarinets. I actually really like how they feel under the fingers. Overall, the ergonomics of this instrument are pretty good, excluding, of course, the stretch on left hand 1 and 2. Again, not too big of a deal, though. Overall, I think it's a fairly comfortable instrument. I do eventually have to fix the floor peg. It did come with one, but unfortunately it broke, so I will have to replace that at some point, at which point it'll be, of course, much more comfortable to play. Right now I've just been playing with a neck strap, and again, thanks to the fact that it's maple, it's actually a very light instrument, much lighter than any other bass clarinet that I have. So to give you an idea of how light this instrument is, I put it on a scale and you can see it only weighs about 3 pounds. Compare that to my 1947 Buffet bass clarinet, which only has a range to low E flat, and it weighs just under 6 pounds. Now obviously most of the difference in weight between these two instruments comes down to the fact that this is a French bass clarinet, which has obviously a larger body diameter and more keys. However, maple is still a much lighter wood than grenadilla. In addition to this, it's also very easy to machine and it's readily available, in addition to being very cheap. So this really begs the question, why don't we see maple on some of the lower sizes of clarinets? Specifically contralto and contrabass clarinets are very hard to make out of wood because it's very hard to find pieces of grenadilla or rosewood that are long enough to make these instruments. I really think manufacturers should explore the possibility of making some of these instruments in maple instead. As we've already seen from the contrabassoon, that it's very possible to make a low woodwind from maple. Now just for fun, let's compare the sound of this instrument to my 1947 Buffet bass clarinet, which would be a good representation of the equivalent French bass clarinet at the time of manufacture of this instrument. So I think personally I preferred the tone of the German system instrument in the upper register, where it sounded a little bit less strained and a little bit more refined. However, in the low register, I think I preferred the tone of the French bass clarinet, where I felt it sounded a little bit more smooth and mellow. I think that makes a lot of sense given the different bore sizes of these instruments. Again, the bore size of this German bass clarinet is 20.5 millimeters, whereas the French bass clarinet I just played is 23.3 millimeters. Thank you all for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you all have a wonderful day.